Princess Xalyur's crystalline antennae flickered with distress as Emperor Kelthor announced her betrothal to Commander Jackson Wells of Earth. The grand throne room fell silent, its bioluminescent walls dimming in response to her shock. "The survival of our people depends on this alliance," her father explained, his 4 eyes solemn beneath the weight of his crystal crown. "The void horde grows stronger with each passing cycle." Xalyur's inner lights pulsed with mounting anxiety. "Father, surely there must be another way to secure this alliance." The Emperor's secondary hands clasped together in the gesture of finality. "The human diplomatic corps has agreed that a royal bond will demonstrate our commitment more effectively than any treaty. Their military strategists are unparalleled in the known galaxy." Xalyur had studied humans extensively during her diplomatic training. They were a puzzling species who had achieved interstellar travel despite their physical limitations and short lifespans. Most troubling of all, they lacked the resonance chambers that Cypherians used to project and receive emotions. Humans possessed only a heart that pumped blood, not feelings. "How can I bond with a being who cannot share in our emotional communion?" she asked, her voice causing ripples in the liquid crystal pillars surrounding the throne. The Imperial advisor Venzik stepped forward, data crystals hovering between his elongated fingers. "Our sensors indicate that humans experience what they call emotions, though they cannot project or receive them telepathically. They rely on facial expressions, vocal tones, and primitive gestural language." "A life of isolation," Xalyur murmured, the concept almost impossible to comprehend. Cypherians shared emotions from birth, their collective consciousness, a comforting presence even in solitude. The thought of being trapped in one's mind without connection seemed like a living death. "The human delegation arrives in 3 cycles," the Emperor continued. "Commander Wells is their foremost expert on alien civilizations and has led successful diplomatic missions to 17 different species, including species who consume their negotiating partners," added Venzik, scrolling through his data crystals. "He has survived situations that would have destroyed most beings." Xalyur's royal attendant, Vexmora, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps humans have qualities our instruments cannot detect," she suggested quietly. Later that evening, Xalyur retreated to her private gardens, where emotion-sensitive foliage responded to her turmoil with swirls of deep purple and blue. She accessed the central knowledge repository, immersing herself in human biological data. Their skin lacked luminescent properties. Their eyes didn't shift color with emotional states. Their vocal structures produced a limited range of sounds. How do they connect with each other? She wondered aloud to Vexmora, who sat nearby arranging ceremonial flowers. "Perhaps they have developed other methods," Vexmora suggested. "Not all connection requires telepathy. Even the native wildlife of our world finds ways to communicate." Xalyur touched a floating memory crystal, which projected images of human art, architecture, and music. "They create beauty despite their limitations," she acknowledged. "But can beauty substitute for true emotional resonance?" The crystal shifted to display Commander Jackson Wells's official portrait. He stood straight-backed in a formal uniform, his expression carefully neutral. Dark hair, cropped short in military fashion. Eyes that reflected light, but revealed nothing of the consciousness behind them. "I am a princess of the Cypherian Empire," Xalyur whispered, straightening her posture as the royal advisors entered with ceremonial preparation scrolls. "I will fulfill my duty to my people, regardless of personal cost." But as the Earth delegation's arrival time flashed across the crystal displays, her inner lights dimmed with dread. She would soon be bound to a being who could never truly know her mind or heart, a creature her people considered, by their very nature, heartless. The Earth vessel descended through Zephyr's prismatic atmosphere, its metal hull starkly industrial among the organic Cypherian architecture. From her observation balcony, Xalyur watched the ship's controlled landing, her inner luminescence fluctuating with anxiety. "They rely on machines rather than biologically grown vessels," observed High Scholar Mevinar beside her. Fascinating adaptation for beings with such short lifespans. The welcome platform extended its crystalline walkway as the ship's entry portal dilated. Commander Jackson Wells emerged first, pausing briefly to adjust to Zephyr's lighter gravity. He stood shorter than the Zephyrian honor guard, but moved with surprising grace. 3 human diplomats followed, their faces partially obscured by atmospheric adaptation masks. "Remember, Your Highness," whispered Vex Mora, adjusting HFY's ceremonial veil. "Humans consider direct emotional projection invasive. Their privacy boundaries differ from ours." HFY nodded, her antennae tucking closer to her head in the gesture of restraint. The imperial procession began, crystal bells resonating at frequencies designed to evoke respectful welcome. She studied Jackson from behind her veil. His strange, flat face lacked proper luminescence, and his brown eyes didn't shift color with emotions like her people's did. Most disturbing was the complete silence where his emotional presence should be. The emptiness felt like standing at the edge of a void. Princess HFY of the 7th Resonance, keeper of the ancestral harmonies, announced the Imperial Herald, his voice carried by acoustic amplifiers, extends formal welcome to Commander Jackson Wells of Earth, emissary of the Human Alliance. Jackson stepped forward and bowed precisely at the angle indicated in the diplomatic briefings. "Your Highness, I bring greetings from Earth and gratitude for your welcome." His voice was deeper than Zephyrian males, with more tonal variation than she expected. During the formal introduction, HFY extended her antennae in the traditional greeting, instinctively attempting to sense his emotional landscape. Nothing. Just silence where another Zephyrian's emotional presence would hum with complex harmonies. Jackson extended his hand instead, a primitive physical gesture she had been briefed to expect. When their skin touched, she jumped slightly at the unexpected warmth. His skin temperature ran hotter than Zephyrian standard. "I look forward to learning about your culture, Princess," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that momentarily disoriented her. Without telepathic signals to interpret, she found herself studying micro-expressions, the slight crinkle near his eyes, the careful control of his facial muscles. The reception proceeded through its ceremonial phases, with ritual offerings and diplomatic platitudes exchanged. Jackson performed each custom flawlessly, having clearly studied Zephyrian protocols extensively. Yet something about his performance felt different from rehearsed diplomacy. He seemed genuinely curious about each ritual, asking the court historian detailed questions about their origins. "Your atmosphere contains 15% more oxygen than Earth standard," he commented during the tour of the Crystal Gardens. "It makes your colors appear more vibrant to human eyes. Our evolutionary path required higher oxygen content for proper bioluminescence," HFY explained, surprised by his scientific interest. When the formal reception concluded, HFY retreated to her private chambers, feeling strangely exhausted. Interpreting another being without emotional resonance required intense concentration. "He seems respectful," offered Vex Mora, preparing the princess's evening meditation chamber. "Respectful? Yes. But how can I possibly form a genuine bond with someone whose inner world remains completely closed to me?" HFY touched the communication crystal on her desk, activating the interstellar database. "Computer, access human courtship rituals and bonding behaviors." The crystal illuminated, projecting information into the air before her. She studied the strange customs of these beings who had somehow achieved advanced civilization, despite their fundamental isolation from one another. How did they survive, each locked in the prison of their own minds? And how could she possibly fulfill her royal duty by joining with one of them? The Imperial Archivist Selvora led them through the Heritage Gardens, where crystal trees stored ancestral memories stretching back millennia. Morning light fractured through the crystalline branches, casting rainbow patterns across the pathway. These memory repositories contain the emotional experiences of 15 generations, Selvora explained, gesturing with elongated fingers. "Our most significant historical moments are preserved in their purest form." Jackson walked beside Xalier, maintaining the culturally appropriate distance her advisors had specified. His steps were measured, his gaze moving thoughtfully between the trees. "These trees hold the collective emotions of past generations," he inquired, voice pitched low out of respect for the sacred space. "Yes," Xalier replied, surprised by his insight. "Each tree resonates with specific emotional frequencies. That one contains the collective joy of the Great Convergence. The blue specimen houses the sorrow of the fifth drought." Jackson stood reverently before an ancient specimen whose trunk spiraled in complex patterns. "On Earth, we plant trees as memorials too," he said softly. "Though ours can't store memories quite like this. We carve names and dates into stone instead, trying to make remembrance last." Something in his tone made Xalier pause. "You sound as though you've created such memorials yourself." A subtle shift crossed his features. What would have registered as a flash of grief in Zephyrian emotional projection appeared as merely a tightening around his eyes. "My sister, she was a pilot. Her memorial tree is growing well now." The unexpected personal revelation caught Xalier off guard. According to her cultural briefings, humans rarely shared personal loss with new acquaintances. Before she could formulate a response, Jackson reached into a pocket of his formal uniform. "I brought something," he said, producing a small container with environmental controls. "A cultural exchange, if it's permitted." The container held a small earth plant with delicate red petals spiraling from a central point. Tiny protective thorns lined its stem. "A rose," he explained. "They're notoriously difficult to grow, but beautiful when they thrive. This variety is called Peace on Earth. It symbolizes hope and new beginnings." Xalier carefully accepted the gift. The botanical division had briefed her on Earth flora, but seeing it directly was different. The plant lacked the bioluminescence of Zephyrian vegetation, yet possessed its own quiet elegance. "It requires specific light patterns and nutrients," she observed. "Without specialized care, it will die within days." Jackson nodded. "Everything mortal dies eventually," he said. "We humans just try to create beauty in the meantime." He paused, then added with a slight curve of his lips, "Your botanical scientists might enjoy the challenge of keeping it alive." The subtle expression, a smile, her briefing called it, fascinated Xalier. Without telepathy, humans had developed remarkably complex nonverbal communication. Their emotions might be hidden from her senses, but they weren't absent. They were simply expressed through different channels. "This afternoon's schedule includes a traditional music performance," Xalier said, making a spontaneous decision. "Would you prefer to attend that, or would you like to see our botanical research facilities where your gift might be studied?" "The research facilities," Jackson replied without hesitation. "I'd like to see how your scientists work. Besides," he added, that slight curve returning to his lips, "I suspect the music might be pitched to frequencies more pleasant to Zephyrian hearing than human." Xalier found herself mirroring his expression, surprising herself. "An astute observation, Commander. Perhaps humans aren't quite as insensitive to subtleties as our report suggested." "Princess," he responded, meeting her gaze directly, "I suspect there's much in those reports that requires revision on both sides." As they continued through the garden, Xalier found herself studying his facial micro-expressions with growing interest. Without telepathy, Jackson navigated a world of sensory isolation she could barely imagine. Yet somehow, he'd not only survived but thrived enough to become a diplomatic leader. Perhaps humans weren't as simple as she first thought. The grand reception hall glimmered with bioluminescent decorations for the formal diplomatic dinner. Distinguished representatives from 17 Zephyrian provinces mingled with the human delegation, their translator devices occasionally emitting soft chimes as they processed idioms. Xalier observed Jackson from across the room. He conversed with Elder Kembox about agricultural exchange programs, seemingly at ease despite being surrounded by beings twice his height. 3 days of structured interactions had established a cautious rhythm between them. The Imperial chef had prepared a special selection of Earth-compatible dishes, which Jackson sampled with appreciative comments. "Your biochemists have done remarkable work adapting these recipes," he told the chef, who pulsed with pleasure lights at the compliment. As the ceremonial toast began, emergency alarms suddenly pulsed through the palace, a distinctive pattern that made every Zephyrian's antennae stiffen in alarm. "Void Horde breach," announced Security Chief Drev Moore, his secondary hands already activating the emergency protocols on his wrist device. "A scout ship has penetrated our outer defensive grid and crash-landed in the Collection District." The Collection District, one of the most densely populated areas in the capital. Holographic displays materialized throughout the hall, showing the crashed vessel embedded in a residential complex. Dark smoke with an unnatural purple tinge billowed from the wreckage. "Toxicity readings are critical," reported a sensor technician. The ship's propulsion system used tritium-based compounds. "The radiation will affect anyone within half a kilometer." The Imperial Guard captain hesitated visibly. "Even with protection suits, our personnel will sustain dangerous exposure levels during evacuation operations." Heartless felt the collective anxiety of her people rippling through the emotional field. The Void Horde's toxic technology was specifically designed to target Zephyrian biochemistry. "How many civilians in the affected area?" Jackson asked, stepping forward. "Approximately 4,000, replied Drev Moore. "Human physiology has higher radiation tolerance than Zephyrian," Jackson stated, turning to his delegation. "Lieutenant Chen, contact our ship. Have them send down our hazard team and equipment immediately." Heartless watched in confusion as Jackson removed his formal diplomatic sash and began issuing crisp orders to his team. "Commander, this isn't your responsibility," she said. Jackson's expression remained focused as he accepted an emergency communication device from one of his staff. "With respect, Princess, alliance means shared responsibility. Besides, our environmental suits can withstand triple the radiation that would harm Zephyrians." The Imperial Guard captain interjected, "The radiation levels would still be dangerous even for humans." "Those are civilians down there," Jackson responded simply. "We can help." Within minutes, the Earth vessel had dispatched specialized equipment. Jackson himself joined the first response team despite his diplomatic status. Through the palace's monitoring system, Heartless watched as the human team coordinated with Zephyrian emergency responders, creating evacuation corridors through the toxic cloud. Jackson worked methodically, carrying injured Zephyrians to medical transports. Through his helmet camera feed, Heartless could see his face. Tension around his eyes, beads of moisture on his skin, signs of physical strain her briefings had taught her to recognize. On the southwestern edge of the evacuation zone, sensors detected a small life sign, a child separated from the evacuation groups. The radiation readings in that section had reached critical levels. "Too dangerous," declared the Zephyrian coordinator. "We'll send a retrieval drone." "The building's collapsing." Jackson's voice came through the comms. No time for the drone. The command center fell silent as Jackson's helmet camera showed him redirecting toward the stranded child. The small Zephyrian, no more than 5 cycles old, had hidden beneath debris, frozen in terror. Through the camera feed, they watched as Jackson removed his helmet briefly to smile reassuringly at the child. The gesture exposed him to toxic air, but the child immediately responded, reaching out with trembling hands. Heartless's perception shifted irrevocably in that moment. What kind of heartless being would risk death for a stranger's child? Jackson lay motionless in the specialized medical chamber, his skin unnaturally pale beneath the diagnostic lights. Zephyrian healers moved around him with uncertainty, their bioluminescent patterns betraying professional concern. "His system processes toxins differently," explained head healer Zelver to Heartless. "We understand the basic principles of human physiology, but the nuances elude us." Heartless had spent the night cycle in her private chambers accessing the Earth medical database. Now she approached Jackson's bedside with newfound knowledge. Humans require higher ambient temperature during healing, she informed the medical team. And their cellular regeneration accelerates with specific protein compounds. She presented her findings to the head healer, who studied them with interest. Most illuminating, Your Highness, we will adjust our protocols immediately. The princess surprised herself with her dedication to Jackson's recovery. What had begun as diplomatic courtesy had transformed into something more urgent after witnessing his selfless actions during a crisis. 17 Zephyrian children had returned to their families because of the human team's intervention. 4 would not have survived without Commander Wells's direct assistance. During his feverish state, Jackson spoke of Earth, fragments of memories surfacing in his delirium. He mentioned forests with trees that changed colors seasonally, vast bodies of water called oceans, family gatherings with shared meals. Sometimes he called out names: Mom, Dad, Emma. On the third day, his fever peaked. The medical monitors flashed warning signals as his system struggled against the radiation poisoning. HFY remained beside his bed, dismissing her attendant's suggestions that she rest. The human diplomatic team is requesting updates every hour, Vex Moore informed her. They seem equally concerned. Tell them we're doing everything possible, HFY replied, not taking her eyes from Jackson's face. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his condition. The tension around his eyes when in pain, the cadence of his breathing. Near midnight, Jackson briefly woke, his eyes focusing on her with effort. You're still here, he whispered hoarsely. I am, she acknowledged, feeling strangely self-conscious under his direct gaze. I thought I dreamed you. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. The gesture, so simple by human standards, felt strangely intimate to her. Physical contact without emotional projection was not common among her people, except between closest family members. The child, he asked. Safe with her family, HFY assured him, as are all the others you helped evacuate. A slight curve formed on his lips before he slipped back into unconsciousness. HFY remained, her hand still in his, puzzling over the complexity of beings who communicated through such imprecise methods. Without telepathy to guide her, she had to interpret his actions, his words, his expressions. She realized humans communicated through countless subtle signals, each one part of an intricate system evolved to bridge the isolation of their separate minds. The following day, HFY surprised the palace staff by personally transporting Earth foods from the embassy. She arranged for human literature to be loaded onto a reading device and spent hours reading adventure stories aloud while Jackson rested. The princess has developed an unusual attachment to the human. She overheard one attendant comment to another. Perhaps she sees something in him that we cannot, came the thoughtful reply. HFY considered this as she observed Jackson's sleeping form. Humans lack telepathic abilities, true. They could not share in the emotional communion that defines Zephyrian social bonds. But perhaps what they lacked in one area, they compensated for in others. Courage, adaptability, and a profound determination to connect despite the barriers between minds. Jackson stirred, his eyes opening with greater clarity than before. Have you been here the whole time? He asked, his voice stronger. Not continuously, she answered truthfully, but often enough. Thank you, he said simply, the words carrying a weight that surprised her. His recovery had become her personal mission, and she found herself questioning everything she had been taught about these strange, isolated beings who somehow reached beyond the prison of their minds to touch others. As Jackson recovered, the formal diplomatic schedule gave way to more natural interactions. The palace gardens became their preferred meeting place, away from the scrutinizing eyes of court officials. Spring blossoms floated on gentle air currents, their bioluminescence intensifying at dusk. Your physicians tell me I'm almost fully recovered, Jackson said as they walked along the crystalline path. His color had returned, though he still moved with careful deliberation. I have your intervention to thank for that. HFY's antennae flickered with modest acknowledgement. I merely provided information your own medical database contained. But you sought out that information when you could have left my care entirely to others. His direct gaze held a question that made her inner lights pulse with an unfamiliar rhythm. I was curious about human physiology, she offered, not entirely truthfully. Jackson smiled. She had become adept at recognizing this expression. Then perhaps you'd be curious about other aspects of human culture as well. The Earth Embassy occupied a bio-adapted structure at the edge of the diplomatic quarter. Inside, Jackson led her to a chamber specially designed to showcase human artistic achievements. Unlike the immersive emotional projections of Zephyrian art, human creations required physical manifestation. Pigments on surfaces, carved materials, vibrating strings and membranes. Art is how we externalize our internal worlds, Jackson explained, gesturing toward a landscape painting. Without telepathy, we've developed countless ways to make the invisible visible. He guided her to a display of musical instruments. These produce sound waves that somehow evoke emotions without telepathic projection. He activated a recording device, and the room filled with organized patterns of sound. This piece is called Adagio for Strings, he explained. It was composed during one of Earth's darkest periods of conflict. Tadlayer watched in fascination as moisture gathered in Jackson's eyes while the music played. "You're leaking," she observed. "It's called crying," he explained, not wiping the tears away. "Our bodies physically express strong emotions sometimes. This music, it always moves me." "What emotion does it represent?" she asked, trying to categorize the response. Jackson considered this. It's not just one emotion. There's sorrow, yes, but also beauty, fragility, resilience. Human emotions often blend together. Later, in the embassy's small garden, Jackson taught her simple human dances, explaining how movement and touch created connection between people who couldn't share thoughts directly. "Without telepathy, we've had to get creative," he said as he demonstrated a basic waltz position. 3 steps in a repeating pattern, HFY observed, quickly memorizing the movements. "The form is simple," Jackson acknowledged, "but each person brings something unique to it." When he placed one hand at her waist and held her hand with the other, the direct contact sent unfamiliar sensations through her nervous system. As he guided her through the steps, her feet occasionally left the ground in the lighter Zephyrian gravity. "On Earth, we'd be more firmly planted," he laughed, steadying her. The following day, HFY took him to a sacred emotion chamber where Zephyrians shared their deepest feelings. The dome-shaped space was lined with resonance crystals that amplified emotional projections. "Though you cannot project telepathically, you might perceive echoes of our emotional communication here," she explained. They sat facing each other in the center of the chamber. HFY guided him in a simple meditation, gradually allowing her emotional field to expand. Though Jackson couldn't perceive her telepathic projection, the resonance crystals translated some sensations into subtle vibrations and light patterns. "It's like hearing music through a wall," Jackson said softly. "I can sense the pattern but not the details." "That's how your world feels to me," HFY replied. "I perceive the outlines of your emotions through expression and action, but not their fullness." As they left the chamber, Jackson paused. "Perhaps that's not entirely a disadvantage. There's value in the effort of connection, in having to reach across the divide rather than simply merging." The bridge between them strengthened, built from different materials than she had ever imagined possible. The warning sirens began at first light, their harmonic wail designed to penetrate even the soundproof royal quarters. HFY jolted awake, her bioluminescence flaring with instinctive alarm. "Multiple breaches detected in the orbital defense grid," announced the palace security system. "All residents proceed to designated shelter areas." The Void Horde had launched a full-scale attack. HFY rushed to the command center, where Emperor Kelthor already coordinated with military leaders. Holographic displays showed void vessels swarming through gaps in their defensive lines. "They've deployed specialized infiltration units," reported Defense Commander Zevnar. Our security systems are being compromised sector by sector. The human delegation arrived moments later, Jackson immediately joining the tactical discussion. Our vessel reports similar breaches near the Earth Embassy, he informed them, studying the tactical displays with narrowed eyes. They're targeting communication nodes first. A violent tremor shook the palace as something impacted nearby. Emergency lighting flickered ominously. "We need to evacuate you to the secure bunker, Your Highness," urged the Imperial Guard captain, moving toward HFY. Before they could reach the emergency transport, the command center's energy shields failed. Void infiltrators, sleek, biomechanical beings with limbs ending in energy weapons, poured through the ventilation systems. In the ensuing chaos, HFY and Jackson became separated from the main evacuation group. Security bulkheads slammed down automatically, sealing them in a secondary corridor with 2 palace staff members. "Stay behind me," Jackson said, retrieving a compact weapon from his diplomatic uniform. His expression had transformed, all diplomatic pleasantries replaced with focused intensity. "I know an alternate route through the service corridors. We need to reach the secondary command post in the eastern wing." As they navigated through smoke-filled passageways, HFY was struck by how differently Jackson moved during crisis. Each step precise, eyes constantly scanning for threats. His training was evident in every motion. They encountered a group of injured palace staff huddled in a maintenance alcove. Despite the urgency of their situation, Jackson immediately stopped to help. "We can't leave them," he said, already assessing injuries. "That head wound needs immediate attention." HFY observed his quick decision-making, his calm instructions, his gentle handling of the wounded. Without telepathic coordination, humans had developed remarkable individual crisis responsibilities. "Apply pressure here," she found herself saying to one of the uninjured staff, following Jackson's example. Together, they stabilized the wounded enough for transport. As they continued toward the eastern wing, a section of the ancient ceiling began to collapse. Without hesitation, Jackson pushed HFY clear of the falling debris, but became trapped himself beneath a fallen support beam. "Go," he urged through gritted teeth. "Get to safety." Instead, HFY summoned her superior Zephyrian strength, enhanced by the lighter gravity their species had evolved in. She lifted the beam enough for Jackson to pull himself free, shocking herself with her desperate determination to save him. "I thought your kind viewed humans as expendable diplomatic tools," Jackson said as they continued forward, his breathing labored but steady. "That perspective is undergoing revision," she replied, supporting his injured side. They finally reached the emergency shelter where other survivors had gathered. Medical personnel immediately attended to the wounded they'd brought. In a quiet corner, Jackson allowed a medic to examine his injured ribs. While the medic worked, Jackson looked up at HFY. "I came here for diplomatic reasons," he confessed quietly, "but I've stayed for you." Without telepathy to verify his sincerity, HFY had only the steady look in his eyes, the consistency of his actions throughout their time together. "How do humans know when feelings are true without resonance sensing?" she asked, genuinely curious. He took her hand and placed it over his chest. Through the thin fabric of his torn uniform, she felt the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. "We listen to each other's hearts," he said simply, "not just the words or expressions, but the pattern of actions over time." The steady beat beneath her fingers spoke a language older than words, a rhythm that connected all living beings regardless of their origins. After 3 days of fierce fighting, the combined Earth-Zephyrian forces repelled the Void Horde invasion. The damage to the capital was extensive, but the alliance had held. In victory, the two species found mutual respect that diplomatic negotiations alone could never have forged. The Imperial Hall, partially reconstructed, shimmered with decorations for the bonding ceremony. What had begun as a political arrangement now proceeded by genuine choice rather than obligation. Crystal trees intertwined with earth flowers along the processional path. Telepathic resonance music blended with human string quartets, creating harmonies neither species had experienced before. HFY stood before her reflection as attendants made final adjustments to her ceremonial attire. Traditional Zephyrian bonding robes flowed from her shoulders, but she had incorporated elements of Earth wedding traditions: a crown of white flowers, a small blue crystal pendant that Jackson had explained represented an Earth custom called something borrowed, something blue. "You appear contemplative, Your Highness," observed Vex Mora. "I am remembering my reaction when this match was first proposed," HFY replied, her inner lights pulsing with soft amusement. "How terrified I was of bonding with a heartless being." Jackson waited at the center of the Imperial Hall, wearing ceremonial Zephyrian robes modified for human comfort. His expression as HFY approached contained a depth of emotion that needed no telepathic projection to communicate. Emperor Kelthor began the ceremony with traditional words of joining. Then HFY surprised the assembled dignitaries by requesting both the traditional Zephyrian mind-linking ritual and the human exchange of vows and rings. "My people believed humans were heartless," she announced to the gathered representatives of both worlds. "We were looking for the wrong signs of emotional depth." She explained how humans had developed countless ways to bridge their isolation: art, music, dance, poetry, touch, creating connection despite the barriers between minds. "In our search for compatible species," she continued, "we sought those who communicated as we do. We failed to recognize that different paths can lead to the same destination." Jackson stepped forward, holding a small velvet box that had traveled with him from Earth. Opening it, he removed a ring of silver metal inlaid with luminescent crystal from Zephyr's sacred caves. "On Earth, we exchange rings during our bonding ceremonies," he explained to the assembled guests. "The circle represents unbroken connection. No beginning, no end." He placed the ring on HFY's finger, his hand steady despite the historical significance of the moment. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "The heart is not merely an organ," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "It's wherever courage, compassion, and connection reside." The ancient Zephyrian bonding crystals, which amplified emotional resonance between partners, glowed in response to their proximity, something the scientists had claimed was impossible with a non-telepathic species. "It appears even our oldest traditions may need revision," murmured the Imperial Archivist, making careful notes of the phenomenon. As representatives from both worlds celebrated the union, military commanders met in adjacent chambers. The combined fleet prepared to take the fight to the Void Horde strongholds. Intelligence reports indicated the enemy feared this new alliance more than any previous coalition. Later, in a quiet moment away from the celebration, Jackson and HFY stood on a balcony overlooking the capital. Reconstruction had already begun, with human engineering techniques complementing Zephyrian organic architecture. "Do you regret the alliance your father arranged?" Jackson asked. HFY's antennae curved forward in the gesture of intimate affection. "I regret only the time I spent fearing difference rather than embracing it." Above them, the first joint patrol of Earth and Zephyrian vessels crossed the night sky, different in design, united in purpose. "Together," Jackson said, taking her hand, "we're stronger than either could be alone." "Not despite our differences," HFY added, "but because of them."